Let me start first by saying that Power for All is a global campaign focused on accelerating the end of energy poverty through decentralized renewable energy solutions. And one of those is actually our integrated energy approach, which we're currently testing, as you said, in Uganda. And this is essentially a partnership between the utility company and the mini grid developer. And what's great and so efficient about this is that it leverages the comparative advantages of the two to deliver faster and cheaper electrification. So essentially, you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the cheap access to capital, the large consumer base, the scale, but on the other hand, you're getting this, technology-driven, data-driven approach from the mini grid developer. But most importantly, this consumer-centric approach that develops consumption, because that's the key to the business model's work, is that we do a lot of demand stimulation through appliance finance programs. To achieve universal electrification, we would need about 10 million new connections. If we do the business as usual approach, like the grid extension approach, that's estimated to cost about $7 billion. And those costs are very unlikely to ever be recovered because of what I was saying earlier. There's very low consumption base. These are consumers that either do not know how to use energy or that can't afford to buy any appliances. So that's why this integrated approach that delivers electrification at half the connection costs and 3 times the pace is so important and could be a game changer, not just in Uganda, but for the entire region.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.
Welcome to the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. This seminar is in English with interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Hindi. We invite you to follow us in LinkedIn, YouTube, and social media using the hashtag Women Science for the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. We invite you to submit your questions and comments on Slido to be addressed in the Q&A session right after the presentation and the conversation with our distinguished speaker. We will be hearing today from Carolina Pan, Director of Research at Power for All, where she leads the campaign's efforts to aggregate available data, synthesize facts and proof points, and conduct primary research to support the energy access sector and guides the production of high-quality, ready-to-share research content for broad audiences. Carolina Pan will have a conversation with Cynthia Carmona, Regional Project Manager for Asia, based in Simit, Nepal. Carmona has been with Simit since 2013, beginning her journey in the project management unit. Over the years, she has the opportunity to grow into a project manager role in Nepal, where she learned a great deal from her experiences. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Brian Govaerts, Director General of CIMIT, to officially open the event and introduce our distinguished speaker of today, Carolina Pan. Dr. Govaerts, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And once again, welcome to Catalysts of Change, Women Leaders in Science webinar. Once again, we are here for our webinar that is a TED Talk meets Fireside Chat style series, because we have decided we want more women leaders in our organizations, and therefore we want to showcase women leadership, successful stories, learnings. Let's bring together women voices that can show us how it can be done. That way we achieve the goal of broader representation and gender balance in science, and we provide opportunities to hear from women leaders' life journeys, lessons, and insights. In this series, we highlight women leaders in all sorts of capacities, fields, and disciplines, because we believe you can't be what you can see. Today, we are honored to have Carolina Pan as our 31st Catalyst of Change speaker. Yes, you hear that correctly. We are already at number 31. Carolina Pan is the Director of Research at Power for All. She leads the campaign's efforts to aggregate available data, synthesize facts and proof points, and conduct primary research to support the energy access sector, and guides the production of high-quality, ready-to-share research content for a broad audience. She has a background in economics, specializing in international development. Before joining Power for All, Carolina was a researcher at Harvard University and a consultant for IDB, World Bank, and the United Nations. She has worked advising national and subnational governments on economic development strategies, fiscal sustainability, and labor market policies. Additionally, she has focused on the financial and operational performance of public companies and their fiscal impact. Carolina has written several academic articles, case studies, policy memos, and co-authored a book on fiscal policy and the role of state companies in Latin America. She previously served as a professor at the Minerva KGI and Brandeis University and was part of the investor behavior team at State Street Associates. Pan holds a PhD in economics from Brandeis University and master's degree from the University of San Andres in Argentina. Pan is based currently in Cambridge. Carolina Pan will have a conversation with our own Cynthia Carmona. Cynthia is a regional project manager for Asia based in Simit, Nepal. Carmona has been with Simit since 2013, beginning her journey in the project management unit. Over the years, she has had the opportunity to grow into a project manager role in Nepal, where she learned a great deal from her experiences working on the ground with farmers with complex projects. Currently, she serves as the regional program manager for Sustainable Agri-Food Systems program in Asia, and she provides their critical support and guidance to ensure the program's success across the entire region. I hope you will enjoy this conversation between two true catalysts of change, and over to you.
Your mic, girl?
Hi. Okay. Hi, it's
Excellent.
me. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I was just hearing my bio, and I feel like I'm 100 years old. But I think it's true that, what they say, that you kind of overestimate what you can do in a week, but you underestimate what you can do in 10 years. I'm not that old. A lot of the things that were just mentioned, I did simultaneously. But let me talk to you a little bit about my journey, what brought me here, and I was specifically asked to talk about the challenges I faced. So my name is Carolina Pan. I'm currently the research director at Power for All. Power for All is a global campaign that seeks to accelerate the end of energy poverty with decentralized renewable energy solutions. So basically, solar off-grid. So essentially, I work with energy access, which in a way is very related to the energy transition conversation that you hear about all the time. But it's a little bit more, it's not exactly the same. So energy transition is more of a conversation in the global north about, transitioning to cleaner energy sources. I work with developing countries, and for context, there's 750 million people without energy access. 80% of those people live in sub-Saharan Africa, and 80% of those live in rural areas. So my job is to advocate for the use of clean energy to electrify these people, so to gain access. So that's about my current work, but let me start. And I'm not sure how you normally keep this format. For me, it's fine if we want to do it like a very informal conversation and you want to stop me and ask me questions at any point. I'm super open to that. But essentially, I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I was born and raised there. I went to school, and, when I was in high school and we were all thinking, what we want to study, what we want to do when we grow up, that's probably when I found my first big career challenge, which was, how do you choose something that will then help you make a living? And it wasn't because of me, but it was rather because of the context. So I was, at that point, a girl that was very good at math. I knew I wanted to do something quantitative, not math per se, because I always saw that more of like a tool, but something that definitely had math. And in high school, I was a little bit obsessed with astrophysics, partly because there was this very famous astronomer that was our physics professor, and he would build his own telescopes and bring them to class. And we were doing like really cool things like measuring the distances to the stars. And in a way, I think he was able to transmit all of that passion into me. But and at some point I said, okay, I want to do this. I want to do physics. And I think it was a conversation that I had with him that marked me the most. And he said, listen, in this country, if you decide to study physics, you will end up being, a high school professor, a university professor like me, right? And that's probably not what you have in mind when you go on to study physics. There's just no budget, for this type of activities. And, in all fairness, this is the reality of most developing countries, right? There is no money for research or activities that fall out of the scope of the main economic activities of those countries. So very early on, I was like, okay, I probably need to find something that will allow me to work in what I like afterwards and not have to do something else because there's no work for that. And then I said, okay, what's the next, what's the most similar to this that is not physics? And I thought of studying engineering. And at that point, I thought that the closest substitute was mechanical engineering. And then I had a conversation with my dad. And my dad is an engineer, and he's been in the automotive industry in Argentina since forever almost. And my grandfather was one of the people that brought cars to Argentina, or the car industry to Argentina. And he said, listen, as an engineer and as someone that is very close to, the car industry and mechanical engineers in a way, it's not going to be easy for you as a woman. And that was probably the second big challenge, thinking, okay, I can't study whatever I want because I need to be aware of the context, but I also can't study whatever I want because I'm a woman that might face certain biases, hiring biases. So what he was telling me essentially was like, listen, it doesn't matter whether you're the best or, you have the best grades or you're the most talented at something. There are big biases that you need to be aware of. And it's going to be very hard for you to find a job as a woman in this field. So, at 17, I would say it was pretty clear to me that I wasn't going to study exactly what I wanted, but rather something that would, allow me to get a job and make a living afterwards. And again, a lot of this is very context related because I later moved to the US and obviously reality is different. There are a lot of challenges, but different challenges. So I chose economics at that point, and also, to be fair, I'm super happy with my choice. Like, in hindsight, I'm like, at 17, you don't know enough of careers to be like so determined. But I ended up choosing economics. Super happy about that. It had math, but it was a social science. So in the very beginning, I wasn't as thrilled, but I became more and more in time. So I think at this point, and so I went to university also in Argentina, and I did my undergrad, and then I did so the undergrad was what in the US would be, I guess, a Bachelor of Science in economics. And then I did a master's in economics. And then I decided I liked academia, or I wanted to write papers, or at least I wanted to explore that. And again, the Argentine reality meant that I couldn't do it at home. So there's this research, agency that depends on the government, which I guess would be the equivalent of the National Science Foundation in the US, but it's severely underfunded. So it's very hard for people to be full-time researchers. And if you want to do that, you basically have to leave. So that's when I started to apply for PhD programs outside of Argentina, so essentially mostly in the US. And I came to Brandeis University in Massachusetts, so it's the greater Boston area, to do my PhD in international economics and finance. And I think immediately I was very blown away by the amount of, or the differences when you come from the developing world and you move into the developed world, and you see there's like money for research, money for this, money for that. And it was mind-blowing. I was doing my PhD basically for free, right? I was not even for free. I was getting paid to do the PhD, which was also pretty mind-blowing to me. Pay was little, but still enough for a student to make a living and be able to, devote my entire attention to what I was doing, which was pretty amazing. So I ended up choosing international trade and international development as my main fields. And obviously this, again, has a lot to do with where I come from. I've always wanted to understand why, some countries were richer than others, why some countries could export more than others, what determined the differences in income per capita, in standards of living, etc. So for me, international development was always a passion. And I also discovered I was pretty good at writing papers. And when I finished the PhD, I was like, okay, I know I can do this. I know I can write papers. Do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And I was very unsure that I wanted to be an academic, because I also was looking for that extra impact, I guess, in a way. So I did what everybody that finishes a PhD does that don't know exactly what they want to go into, and it's doing a postdoc. So I said, I'm going to try the academic life for a year or two. If I don't like it, then I'm going to the industry or to, a nonprofit or these large development organizations like World Bank, etc. So I'm going to see whether I can do this. And I did my postdoc at the Harvard Kennedy School. And I would say 6 months into my postdoc, I was at a research center that also had an applied area where they were doing applied projects with different governments of the world. And basically what they were doing was they were advising these governments on growth and development strategies. So I found myself talking a lot to the people that worked in the applied area. And at some point I said, I think I like this better. I want to try this. And I convinced them to move me from the research floor to the applied floor. And I started working in these projects. And that for me, I would say, was life-changing, because I went from, yes, getting all of the data, doing all of the data analysis, etc., but not talking or connecting with anyone, to actually sitting down with people at the Ministry of the Economy and trying to understand what their main challenges are, and then getting their data and analyzing their data, but with the whole idea of providing them with some tools, solutions, insights. And that for me, that's the first time I felt I actually had some impact, even if what you tell them, then it's never used, or at least you're shaping the way somebody's thinking about things with data, obviously, because everything that I've always done was data driven, and I think that was always my thing. I will never come empty-handed. I will always use data to back up whatever I'm saying. But it's interesting to see how talking to the right people at the right time can really create big impact. And so that for me was fascinating. And I worked for 3 years in a few projects. The bigger one was one in Saudi Arabia, in which we were looking into labor market policies and understanding how those affected the economy. And the policies had a great intention of increasing Saudi employment, but what we were seeing is the way they were designed and their application were not achieving that, but rather the opposite. So it was interesting to see how you can use data to basically make a really good case for something. After that, I worked as an expert consultant for various consulting firms. I then worked for the Inter-American Development Bank. At this point, we were also I think just hit with the pandemic. And my big challenge here also was that I was basically an expat, right? And I depended on a visa to remain in the US. And at this point, I had a toddler that was going to school in Boston. And so I didn't want to move. Basically, I had like a life in Boston. My husband had a job in Boston, and I needed to stay in the US, but I also needed a visa, basically. And it was hard because I had a few job offers, but because of the pandemic, there was a hiring freeze. At the same time, I was in the green card process, which was very, very, very long. And at the end of the day, it all worked out. But that was, for me, always, the paperwork. To live outside of your home country was always a big deal and a big, burden in a way that, over time I was able to overcome. But it's definitely something that, had I known it before, I would have probably made different decisions. Like look for a job that will sponsor your visa, or, I would have had it more in mind, because you never want to be in the situation in which, if you don't find something, you basically have to like move out of the country. Then I worked for the Inter-American Development Bank, and I wrote a book with them about, the fiscal impact of public companies in the Caribbean. Everything that I've always done was always at that intersection between academia and policymaking in the developing world, basically, and trying to see where the inefficiencies are. And then I also worked for the World Bank, and I wrote a series of papers, also had to do with public companies, but mostly infrastructure. And that's when I started getting very interested in green energies, because I was working with data from utility companies. And I thought, this is very vintage. Like, where's the new stuff? Like, where's the data on renewables? And I found out very quickly that there isn't much, and there's a lot to do in that space. And I started getting very interested in renewable energy. And then that's when I applied for my current position, with, being absolutely open and honest that I didn't know much about renewables, right? But that I was willing to learn, and I was, I wanted to put in the time. And probably the biggest learning for me, after 3 years and 9 months, I would say, at the job, is that you can pretty much learn anything. Like, if you like it and you're willing to put in the time. When I started, I thought, wow, this is really a new world. And now I talk with energy systems engineers on a daily basis, and I don't feel at a disadvantage at any point, right? So basically, that's my entire journey that brought me here. Currently, I would say, if I had to think of my biggest challenge right now, is I have 2 kids, and being able to manage travel, because I work mostly with countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So managing travel with children, and it, in reality, just managing a leadership role when you have children, small children at home, is hard. Because weekends you have to be with the kids and you want to be with your children and devote time with your children, but there's always fires that you need to be putting out. And so that's hard to manage. I think in the US it is particularly hard because of, maternity leave is it's not, there isn't like a federal maternity leave break. That's I think that by law it's like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something that's like ridiculous. And then companies decide on how much they give you. In other countries, especially like in Northern Europe, the laws make it so much more friendly for women to actually have kids and have a career, and the state is gonna pay for whatever costs are incurred. But in the US, it's up to the private sector to decide. And I think that's a big issue for women that want to be in leadership positions. So I'm gonna stop here because I'm sure there's questions and stuff, and I don't want to go over.
Thank you so much, Carolina. So now we give the floor to Cynthia Carmona. She will have a conversation, this rich conversation with you. Cynthia, please, over to you.
Thank you. Hola, Carolina and everyone. My name is Cynthia Carmona, and agriculture, science. I wanted to have this conversation with you, Carolina, because when I read your bio, I wondered how your day would look like. And it's funny because you started saying that, when you started this conversation, you started saying like, wow, that sounds a lot. So how did you manage to do that? So can you tell us how does a normal day look like to you, Carolina? And can you balance everything? In research, leadership, and as you mentioned, being a mom.
Yeah, sure. So my typical day starts with me waking up and getting my kids ready for school, really. That's all I do first thing in the morning, I would say, from 6:30 probably to 7:30. That's like I'm full-time mom mode. Breakfast, getting them dressed, backpacks, everything. And then they go to school. I make my own breakfast, but normally just eat it sitting at the computer because sometimes I have calls starting at 7:45. I try not to start anything before 8 a.m. really, so that I have at least some time to take a deep breath and look at my email and check my calendar and see how my day looks like. And typically I would say my mornings are filled with calls mostly because of the time difference. I'm based in US East Coast and I work with Sub-Saharan Africa. So because of that, so that they don't go to, they don't have to work so late, I take all of my calls with them in the mornings. And then in the afternoon, I speak mostly with my team, but it's when I block chunks of time to actually do deep work. One of the things that, I've learned to manage in time is how do you put your activities in the calendar so that you can actually get things done? Because one of the big struggles in leadership positions is that you have calls with virtually everyone. And when you're talking all the time and you have meetings all the time and everybody wants you to be in that meeting, etc., then you have like maybe an hour here, an hour there, and it's very hard to do task switching. That's how my brain works. I'm in calls talking about something and then having just 1 hour to work on a report that I'm doing. It's not enough. So what I normally do is block chunks of 2, but ideally 3 hours in the afternoon to do deep work. And I said, okay, these 3 hours, I want to get, the results for whatever report I'm doing or this or that. And even if it's other activities that are more quote unquote social activities, because I also am involved in fundraising. But just to plan how I'm going to do the fundraising and just to get everything scheduled, etc., just like block 2 hours and say, okay, these are like fundraising hours. And I go on my email, I, send out either emails or request meetings or things like that, or put things in order, talk to my team, whatever that falls into that category. So I've learned to be very strategic in blocking chunks of time. And then basically my day ends at 5. I leave my house to go pick my kids up from school. And then I would say from 5 to 9, which is when they are asleep in bed. Again, I'm mom mode 100%. And then after that, depends. If I haven't eaten, I eat something, but it's time for me to shower, to do stuff. And then I get on the computer and I finish everything that I wanted to finish, or I see how the day's looking next day, etc. And for me, normally I go to bed probably around midnight.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And I mean, do you think that this schedule that you have made for yourself is, sustainable? Meaning, have you ever faced a burned out peak or season, and how have you tackled that?
So I think the only thing I would change is I would like to get probably an extra additional hour of sleep. But in a way, it's a very conscious choice that I made. I could do it if I wanted to. I'm not forced to go to bed at midnight. It's just for me, probably the hardest thing to do has been balancing motherhood, being an expat, and not having all of the like support network because I'm alone. Well, with my husband, but always like the mother takes most of the burden. And then there's a lot of things that I cannot outsource, right? And in the beginning, it's easy to get lost in all of that. I just found a way to deal with it and say, like, this is kids' time and I'm not going to interrupt it. And I think that has really worked for me. And then when it's work time, it's work time. And then, obviously everything that I do after 9 p.m. is kind of like an optional. I don't have to. So that's kind of like my buffer space to be like, if I'm really exhausted, I'll go to bed early. And sometimes it has happened to me that I just like when putting the kids to bed, I fall asleep and I wake up the next day at 5:30 a.m. and I'm like, oh, where am I? But I think I have that buffer between 9 p.m. and midnight. It would be easier for me if I was, let's say, back home and I had, I don't know, my mother or my entire support network to help out sometimes, or have my kids go to their house and things like that. But I have not had burnout, thankfully. And I think I'm pretty good at understanding my limits. And sometimes when I'm very, very exhausted, like I say, you know what, like I'm going to take a Friday off. Friday is also kind of like a buffer day because it's a no meeting day for me. And I use Friday to finish off things that I haven't finished because in the weekends I do not work. And that's also a limit that I was very, that for me was very easy to impose because of the kids and I have no one else to, care for my kids. So it's like, weekends I'm not working. So Friday is my buffer day. Whatever I haven't finished in the week is going to get done on Friday. So Fridays is no meetings. And I think, obviously I've learned this in time. I can't say it has always been like this. And obviously when my kids were, when they were babies, it was a lot harder to balance and I was underslept and all of that. But right now I feel pretty good with the schedule that I have.
Okay, noted. Thanks for sharing that. I think I have some internet connectivity issues, so apologies for that, but I can still hear loud and clear. So you mentioned, Carolina, something about establishing limits. Is it something that came easy for you? I mean, meaning, did you do this, since the beginning of your career, or has it been something that you've kind of learned or even think that you've earned those limits?
It's a great question. No, I wasn't always like this, and I feel that if you don't do it like in an active way, because it's also imposing limits, I think it's a very active thing. It's not that you just say once, I'm not going to do this, and then people will respect that forever. Forget, they ask you for stuff. They ask me for stuff all the time, and I have to constantly remind people, no meetings on Fridays. I'm not going to answer, a work-related, question on the weekends, things like that. I have to constantly remind people of that. But no, it's definitely something that I've learned over time. I've also learned by talking to other women that have gone through, bad experiences, or that had said, you should do this before it's too late. Like if you don't impose these limits and people know that you're going to be working, let's say on a Saturday, then they assume you're working on a Saturday and they will send you stuff to do and things like that. So I think for me was a lot of like talking to other women, especially other mothers, and finding out what has worked for them and what is also acceptable and what is not acceptable. Because obviously work cultures vary in different countries. And, what the limits are also different in different countries. Like in some countries, you're a lot more protected by the law. So there's things that, an employer would never ask from you, like after hours, for instance, because I don't know if like in countries like Argentina, where you have like strong unions, that is very problematic. Like you can sue them for that. So they wouldn't do it. But in other places, they would, unless you tell them, no, this is my time and this is my, personal time, and I'm not going to answer after certain hours, or you block your WhatsApp or but no, I definitely learned to put limits over time. I wasn't always like this.
Yeah, I get it. So I'll pivot a little bit in my question to you, Carolina. Do you think there are any particular challenges of being a woman working in the field of energy?
There are, I think, but I think the challenges are a bit contextual, not necessarily. I mean, the field of energy varies a lot depending on what countries you think of, right? I think in the US, it's a lot more common to have women in energy. Obviously, depending on what type of energy, it's more common to have women in renewable energy than it is to have women in oil and gas, for instance. That's for sure. Like there's definitely jobs that are more female friendly than other jobs. But I see a good deal of women in the US studying careers like energy systems, engineering, or related fields, much more than in developing countries. So I do, for instance, one of the main things that I do at Power for All is a job census of the sector in 4 sub-Saharan African countries and India. And the share of women in the sector is very low. But it's also like, countries where the share of women in the workforce is very low because of cultural reasons, because moms are supposed to stay home and care for the babies, because, husbands don't want their wives to be talking to other men and be out there working, or fathers want their daughters. So there's a lot of like context that shapes this. So I think obviously advanced Western economies are there's a lot more gender parity than in the developing countries I work in, definitely.
I see. So what advice would you give to CIMMYT to help grow and support its women leaders?
Well, there's a lot. I think this is this webinar series that you do is great, because I think it all starts with awareness raising, right? I think there's a lot of, the main way to help women get into leadership position is basically by, letting them know that they can do it. And there is a lot that has to do with education and skill development and awareness raising. But also there's a lot of advocacy, I think, that needs to be done when it comes to, for instance, economic empowerment. Because yes, you can talk to women, you can tell them they're great, you can have women study whatever they want and try to pursue their dreams. But if then they're not paid equally as men, or they don't have access to entrepreneurship or venture capital or whatever to start a business, and they are in very disparate positions, then, I mean, you can only get so far, right? So there's a lot, I think, that needs to be done when it comes to economic empowerment. And I think there's a lot of advocacy that we should be doing. There's obviously mentorship that is great, and I think helps. And I think one of the main things that help women grow in their careers is talking to other women that are, at the level that they want to reach, and having them share their experiences and help them. And I think women should help women a lot more than we currently do. And then there's obviously like the obvious, like all of the policy stuff, like healthcare and female well-being. Like we need more laws to, make jobs more family friendly, so that women can actually stay in leadership positions and they don't have to quit to care for their families, etc.
So I have a final question before we move on to the open floor. I mean, throughout also your initial talk, you mentioned that you received advice from a professor, your father, and so throughout your career, you have received that advice, and I'm pretty sure women or other colleagues also look at you as that point of reference for coaching and a little bit of mentoring. Would you have a usual advice, or what would be your usual advice that you give whenever someone comes to you for some mentoring?
Well, I think it varies a lot, and I have had a lot of instances, because I taught for a while, and teaching for me was one of the most rewarding things, because it gives you access to all of these young people that want to know what to do next. And I always felt very identified with the students because I was in their place years ago. So for me, that gave me like really a great platform to actually talk to people and give them advice. I think advice depends a lot on their personal circumstances and their preferences too, because it's very different. I find myself, for instance, giving a lot of advice to Argentine students that want to leave Argentina and go study abroad, right? Because I've done it. Like, how did you do it? Like, what's more convenient? Do I go to Europe? Do I go to the US? Which is the better market? Things like that. Things that I know that I didn't know actually when I came to the US to study. And I wish somebody would have told me, like, if you live in Europe for 5 years and you do the PhD there, you will get automatically your residency. Like that, I didn't know. Like in the US, it was almost, I spent like 12 years before I could apply for a green card. And had I known that, maybe I would have made a different decision. I don't know. But, there's a lot of knowledge that I have now that I do give to students, but it depends on their circumstances. So one thing is people that want to leave the country and go study somewhere else. And then here in the US, I've had a lot of students asking me like, what internship do I do? Should I go into consulting? Should I go into banking? And then I have to sit with them and be like, what do you want to do after you graduate? Like, what are your preferences? Don't do something just for the sake of it. Just like think strategically. I don't know, like reach out to the people that actually work in these companies and find out more about what they do, what's their day-to-day. So I think advice depends a lot on who's asking for it. But when you were formulating your question, one of the things that I've never thought of actually was that when I was growing up, most advice to me was given by men. And I think part of the reason it's also like very cultural. Like my mom quit her job when I was born to care for me, and then my sisters. And so like all of the role models I had, like even though she was always telling me like, you go out there, you work, and you don't depend on anyone, etc. But I think all of my role models were men, because culturally women are more stay-at-home moms back home. It's slowly changing, but it's still, I think, the bigger reality. And it was definitely the reality when I was growing up.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this conversation, Carolina. I'll hand it over to Isabel or any other person from the audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for this enlightening conversation with Carolina Pan. Now we would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. We invite you to raise your hand, to turn on your camera, and unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question or comment, or you can submit it via Slido. By now, we have several questions in Slido, so I would like to start with the first one. What impact do you hope your work will have in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you measure success in your projects?
Great question. So success, if I'm completely honest, I would love for us to be out of business in the next 10 years. I work with energy access, and as long as there's people without energy access, I will keep working. So I think a measure of a success for us is having each year less and less people that depend on our work, basically. Now, on a more mundane scale, I would say that how we measure our success has to do with measuring impact, and specifically, it depends a lot on the project, but for some projects, it is how much money do we actually get from donors or other stakeholders invested in the sector thanks to the work that we do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to give the floor to Emily Injet. She would like to raise a question. Emily, open your micro and your camera if possible.
Hi, Carolina. Thank you so much for the talk. It was so enlightening. Yeah, I have one question, though you touched a little bit about it on mentorship. You indicated that okay, women in leadership, when you are still raising your kid, is usually difficult, because you have less time and you need also to focus on your kid. So as the young mothers who are growing up in career, do you advise us not to go for leadership position while we are still raising children? Or if yes, how can we handle that?
No, definitely go for it. I think that because women normally have less opportunities than men to, even find a job, maintain a job, but also get a leadership position. I think all opportunities that you have in that sphere, you have to take them. How I learned to deal with this is, take the opportunity and then figure out what system works best. And if taking the opportunity means I have to wake up 2 hours early and, get my kids ready earlier and, do it. And if that means that I have to hire somebody to help me out, yes, I hire somebody and sometimes I am alone because, my husband travels and I'm alone with 2 children and I have to do stuff and I have to be in meetings and sometimes I just can't. And how I think about it is I have 2 choices. I could quit everything and just stay home, or I can keep doing what I love to do and ask for help. And, again, because I'm not back home and I don't have my support network that would just come help me out for free, let's say, I have to pay for it and I do it. And I don't even think of it. I say, okay, if I need, 3 hours of a nanny, I will pay her for 3 hours and she helps out with the kids while I'm in whatever place I need to be and so on. It's not easy to manage, but you can do it. And I think especially with children, you learn to be so organized. Like, had I been this organized before I had the kids, I would have been 100 times more productive. But I learned to be extremely organized and efficient.
Thank you, Emily, for raising the question. Here is another question in the chat. It says, "May I ask, as an expert in the field of energy, how do you envision the future of energy impacting food policy?"
Wow, that's a big question. There's so much. So again, it's very contextual. In the countries where I work with, energy is very tied to food because there's a lot of food insecurity, right? And climate change is making things worse. So there's droughts and there's floods, and that means that every year less and less people have access to food. So basically, one of the main things in my job is to show that energy, like connections per se, matter a lot, not just so that people have light, but also so that, farmers can cope with climate change, they can adapt to it, they can get, let's say, a solar water pump that it's going to help them when there's a drought to still be able to produce. It's going to help, countries to be more productive, to make more income, etc. So overall improving lives and livelihoods. I think, the food question, if you think sub-Saharan Africa, you need energy to produce more food. Now, obviously, I advocate for sustainable energy, for renewable energy, and sustainable agricultural practices. But there's obviously another debate out there, which is more of a global north debate, which is whether, like, do we keep, raising cows given the levels of methane, etc. There's ways to do more sustainable agriculture as well. I'm not very deep into those discussions because, again, I work a lot with energy access.
Thank you so much. Here's another question. It says, in your experience, what roles does organizational culture play in building women leaders?
A big role. I think a big role. I am lucky enough that I'm in an organization where the CEO is a woman. And I think, you obviously want people that's the type of people you want, because you want people that understand or that were in your position, let's say 10, 15 years ago, right? So it's easier to explain your challenges to a woman. It's easier to explain your challenges to another mom. Obviously, that's not to say that there aren't still challenges, because obviously you have to get your work done. So obviously, like, the fact that you have kids, it's not an excuse for not doing things, for instance, right? But I think the organizational culture needs to be very female friendly, which doesn't mean relaxed or anything like that. It's just understanding the context. And women bring so much to the workforce. Like, we bring such diversity of experiences, thoughts. There are so many papers out there showing how much more productive a workspace is when you have a mix of women and men, and not just men in it. That even the data is overwhelmingly in favor of having women in the workforce. But yes, I think the culture of the organization plays a big deal, and not just in attracting women, but in also keeping them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Here we have another question in the chat box. It says, did the lack of female role models during your upbringing in Argentina impacted your sense of identity or aspirations? Did that influence your perspective of leadership and career development?
It's a very interesting question. It did not, for some reason. I was always like the biggest fan of, my grandfather and my father. I never really thought of myself, oh, I'm different, or I'm and they always treated me like I was not, right? Like, they obviously when my dad told me, listen, like, this is not a female-friendly career, like, he was telling me, you're a girl. If you were a boy, this would be different. But in my entire upbringing, no one made differences. And I think that was pretty key for me. Like, my parents were always like, whatever you want, like go for it, you know, reach for the stars. And I think that that it did not. I can see how it could, though, affect. I never thought much of it growing up, really. But also I think that it's changing a lot in Argentina. Like, when I was growing up, most of my friends' moms were stay-at-home moms. Now most of my friends that are back home work. So I think that's also changing.
Thank you. Thanks for this insightful and honest presentation. In order to conclude, what would be the words of wisdom that you would like to share, the advice for the audience? What would be the message that you would like us to take away?
Ooh, big ask. I think two key things. The first one is learn to play with the rules of the game that you're in, right? And as I said during my entire conversation, I think a lot of things are very contextual. Learn your context and make the most out of it. Like, whatever decisions you make, if you want to study something, do it knowing how things are going to be afterwards, right? So I wouldn't say don't restrict yourself. I would say know what rules are out there and play with those rules. That's number one. And I think number two is that, don't be afraid. Just go out, talk to people, try things. I think there's a lot of, and if I think of my career, most of what I ended up doing was me asking people to include me in some project because I wanted to learn something. It wasn't something that I was super prepared for, but that intrigued me and I was curious about. So expose yourself, put yourself out there, talk to people, ask, and just do things. You can, as I said before, you can pretty much learn anything if you just put in the time and the effort.
Thank you. So we would like to thank Carolina Pan, an outstanding leader in energy, science, and policy. Thank you, Carolina, for sharing with us your outstanding professional and personal journey. We admire you for your great accomplishments and the best of the success on your projects. On behalf of Dr. Brian Govers, Director General of CIMMYT, we thank you for your valuable time for being here today. Also, you are a busy woman. And also we thank the audience that joined. Do not miss our following Catalyst of Change, Women Leaders in Science series in 2 weeks. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Thank you so much.
So if we think globally, there's about 500 million smallholder farmers around the world, and 2 billion people are relying on those 500 million for income, for food, for self-sustenance. If you take Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, the majority of those smallholder farmers do not have access to tractors and mechanization services. This results in farmers planting late, under-cultivating their land, and really just missing out on that opportunity to make more income or save money by not hiring 20 to 40 people to service their land. And so we wanted to really look at why are there no tractors, and can bringing in tractors into these markets and these smallholder markets, can it increase productivity and can it increase income?
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.